distinguished participants, on behalf of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building and the UNFCCC Secretariat, I would like to welcome you all to the 2022 Durban Forum Deep Dive, the PCCB's follow-up webinar to the 11th Durban Forum on Capacity Building. Our focus today is on building capacities for green skills and climate innovation. My name is Simone Albus. I'm the Program Officer in the Capacity Building Subdivision at the UNFCCC Secretariat, and we are supporting the work of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. For those not yet familiar with the PCCB, the committee is a constituted body that serves the UN Climate Change Convention and also the Paris Agreement. It was established in 2015 and is operational since 2017. Currently, the PCCB is in the second year of its second work plan for 2021 to 2024. And in line with the mandate it received from the COP, the mission of the PCCB is to identify capacity gaps and needs and potential solutions, including enhancing the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate change. And yeah, on behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank all participants for your interest in attending this event. My colleagues and I, we're very much looking forward to interesting and insightful discussions over the next 90 minutes or so. And before we start, I would just like to point everyone to the meeting Netiquette, which is projected on the screen. We'll leave that on for just a few seconds for you to familiarize yourselves with it. I guess most importantly, to avoid disruption and background noises, we would like to kindly ask everyone to keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off, unless you are given the floor to make an intervention during the Q&A session. And please also note that by participating in this event, you consent for it to be recorded. Now, to begin with, I would very much like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Marcena Kodor. Marcena has over 20 years of professional experience in senior managerial positions and advisory roles, including 15 years of experience in the carbon market, international climate negotiations, and in the EU ETS administration. She works currently as a climate policy expert at the Institute for Environment Protection in Warsaw, Poland. And she's also a long-standing PCCB member, and she used to be one of the PCCB co-chairs. Today, Marcena will provide a scene-setting presentation as well as the closing remarks on behalf of the PCCB. And she will now share with you more about the background of the webinar, the relevance of the webinar topic to the work of the PCCB, but also on the flow of the session. Thank you very much, Marcena, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simone, for introduction. And I'm very happy to be able to open this meeting. Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. I've been already introduced by Simone. My name is Marcena Kodor, and I'm a member of the PCCB. And I lead a working group of the PCCB on awareness raising, communication, and stakeholder engagement. This session will focus on capacity building for green skills and climate innovation, fostering coherent implementation of climate and development agendas in the context of sustainable recovery. To provide you with a bit of background, I would like to recall that at the request of the COP, the focus of the annual Durban Forum on Capacity Building since 2021 is thematically aligned with the annual focus area of the PCCB. And this year, our focus area is building capacity for coherent implementation of NDCs in the context of national development plans and sustainable recovery. The PCCB at the beginning of this year opened a call for submissions on this year's focus area to inform our work throughout 2022. And the synthesis of the submissions has not only informed the design of the 11th Durban Forum at the June Climate Conference in Bonn, but also the design of today's webinar. And it will also shape the narrative of a thematic day at our 4th Capacity Building Hub. This is our annual event organized jointly with the COP in Sharm, and this year it will be in Sharm el-Sheikh. In terms of key themes emerging from the submissions, we have received relevant stakeholders, particularly highlighted the importance of capacity building for horizontal and vertical integration of climate plans and action into development and recovery measures and interventions. Climate-informed national planning and budgeting systems, improved legislative measures, economic and market instruments, and awareness-raising activities to bolster technological innovation, improved access to climate finance, including through improved capacities for project development and pipeline management, and the engagement of the private sector. Enhanced availability and quality of climate data and policy assessments to foster evidence-based decision-making, and education, training, and skill development to promote behavioral change and bolster a green and just transition in the labor market as part of sustainable recovery plans. As the UNFCCC constituted body mandated with supporting the enhancement of coherence and coordination of capacity building activities under and outside of the Convention and Paris Agreement, the PCCB strives to shed light on capacity building issues and challenges that are shared, prioritized, and addressed by many actors. Capacity building for green skills and climate innovation in the context of sustainable recovery is among those important issues. By bringing attention to this topic, for example, at this very event, the PCCB aims to identify challenges and capacity gaps for effectively supporting processes and actions that are conducive to climate innovation, knowledge and institutional barriers that may hinder the greening of skills and jobs, and opportunities and solutions that could address those gaps and challenges. Both during the Durban Forum discussions as well as through the submissions by party and non-party stakeholders on our 2022 focus area, the importance of bolstering innovation to unlock endogenous capacities for sustainable recovery and strengthening green skill development for supporting a just transition in the workforce came up as issues that go hand in hand and that should be prioritized as pertinent to advancing capacity building efforts towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement. For us in the PCCB, this topic is not only very relevant to our mandate, but it's also a concern shared by our stakeholders. More than 60 members of the PCCB network as part of their work have a strong focus on innovation, technology, skill development, and just transition. Topic of today's webinar is also strongly linked to our collaborative work with other bodies and entities under and outside of the Convention and Paris Agreement, many of whom were consulted in the preparation of this event and some of whom are present today. And last but not least, this topic is strongly linked with cross-cutting issues, including gender issues, youth issues, elements of ACE, and local and indigenous peoples' knowledge. The topic of bolstering climate innovation and green skill development for the implementation of the Paris Agreement and just transition is not an isolated concern for capacity building. Rather, it cuts across all thematic areas and sectors. For instance, under the UNFCCC, in addition to the PCCB, there are various bodies and processes directly working towards addressing these issues. For example, bodies under the technology mechanism, the TEC and the CTCN, pursue policy and action conducive to climate innovation, including related to the national innovation systems, as well as climate incubators and accelerators. The ACE process has a strong element related to skills development and training with a view to ensure a just transition. The Katowice Committee of Experts on the Impacts of the Implementation of Response Measure addresses the issue of just transition of the workforce as one of its activities. With regard to the constituencies, many groups, including UNGO, BINGO, TUNGO, and the Gender and Women constituency, have placed climate innovation, green skills, and the just transition among their highest priorities. As the Paris Agreement enters the era of implementation, it's of utmost importance for various actors to be further coordinated and for actions to be formulated and implemented in a coherent manner. We hope that this webinar is a step in the right direction for bringing together actors involved in capacity building efforts on this topic and shape a space for exchange and dialogue towards more impactful solutions. To this end, we have the pleasure of having a distinguished lineup of panelists and speakers from a range of backgrounds to help shape this multi-stakeholder dialogues, to touch on the policy issues, but also provide examples on the ground. In this first section of this event, we will have a discussion with representatives of the CTCN, TUNGO, and the UNESCO-UNEVOC International Center to discuss the opportunities and challenges of promoting innovation and fostering a green skill development for a just transition on the labor market in the context of implementation of the NDCs. On behalf of my colleagues in the PCCB, I thank you all for accepting our invitation and look forward to a fruitful discussion. We will then address any questions or comments that emerge from the panel exchange, and we'll take a look at a digital wall populated with relevant examples and resources shared by a range of stakeholders in response to the PCCB's call for submissions on the 2020 focus area, as well of the lead up to this event. You are welcome to add more resources and examples of work to this collection. A selection of these resources will be published on the UNFCCC Capacity Building portal. Then we will listen to two speakers, one party, which is a representative of South Africa, and one non-party stakeholder from private sector, who will highlight a couple of examples of work from their context that are also presented on the resource wall. Given the limited time and space available to us in this meeting, we hope that you will find time to explore the resources further in your own time after today's webinar. We will then hear insights from a member of the TEC who will reflect on the examples shared, particularly in the context of the TEC's work on national systems of innovations and the collection of case studies that they have been developing in the past few months. At last, we will have a short session of questions and answers and a recap with the hope to continue this conversation in the coming weeks and months, including at the 4th Capacity Building Hub, which will be another opportunity for all us to meet. I would like to once again thank you all for joining us today and encourage you to actively engage in the discussions and contribute to the exchanges with your valuable experience and insights, including during this event, through the digital resource wall and through a post-event survey that will be shared with you at the conclusion of this session. With that, I will hand the floor back to Simone to introduce our panelists and kickstart the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcena, for setting the scene for the webinar. And yes, we will now move straight into our panel discussion, where we will delve more in depth into the topic of this webinar with our three distinguished panelists from the Climate Technology Center and Network, CTCN, from the UNESCO-UNEVOC International Center for Technical and Vocational Education and Training, or short TBET, and from the UNFCCC's Trade Union Non-Governmental Organizations, or short the TUNGO constituency, respectively. First, allow me to introduce Kenneth Barrientos. Kenneth joined the UNESCO-UNEVOC in 2013 as a program officer, and since 2020, she is leading and coordinating UNEVOC's SDGs and Greening TBET program, which is aimed at strengthening TBET institutional capacities, developing normative guidance, practical implementation tools and learning resources, and facilitating knowledge sharing and network exchange on the topic. For the past 15 years, Kenneth has worked in the education and TBET sector, including in UNESCO's Asia-Pacific Education for Innovation and Development program in Bangkok, at the Colombo Plant Staff College for Technician Education in Manila, and at the International Coral Reef Initiative Secretariat, also in the Philippines. Welcome to this webinar, Kenneth. Then next, please allow me to introduce Aline Conchon. Aline is a senior policy advisor at Industry All Europe, the European Trade Union Federation of Manufacturing, Mining and Energy Workers, and is part of the UNFCCC Tungo constituency. She's coordinating Industry All Europe's activities in the area of vocational education and training, as well as of company policies aimed at supporting trade union action in multinational companies. She supports the Training and Education Working Group of the European Sectoral Social Dialogue Committee for the metal sector. And with 15 years of experience in research and policy advice, she has also built high-level expertise on worker participation. Welcome, Aline. And then last but not least, it is my pleasure to also introduce Nadège Trosselier. Nadège is a climate technology specialist at the Climate Technology Center and Network, supporting the design and implementation of CTCN technical assistance and capacity building activities. She has 12 years of experience on climate change, including climate finance, mitigation, particularly through the design of roadmaps and low carbon strategies, NDC implementation, as well as climate change adaptation with deep expertise on vulnerability assessments. Nadège has been working within the scope of the UNFCCC since 2006, where she started as part of the designated authority for the CDM in Morocco. Welcome, Nadège. Before we start the discussion, let me provide some quick guidance on how you as participants in today's webinar can engage with our panelists. I would like to kindly ask you to reserve your questions for the panelists for the Q&A session following the panel discussion. During the Q&A discussion later, you will be able to either directly pose your questions in the chat, or you can also write in the chat to request making an intervention from the floor. Okay, now to get the ball rolling, I would like to start our discussion by addressing my first question to Nadège. Nadège, the CTCN has a long history of supporting innovation-focused activities on the ground, which is one of the key elements of the technology mechanism under the UNFCCC. And you are starting also a new work program very soon. Can you share with us your views on what have been the key barriers and challenges that the CTCN experienced in implementing its work in the previous period, in the previous work program, and how are you envisioning your work related to innovation in particular to become even more effective in the next period?
Yes, thank you very much, Simone. Good morning, afternoon, evening to the participants of this webinar, and thank you very much to the PCCB for inviting the CTCN to the Durban Forum. For those who wouldn't know, the CTCN, the UN Climate Technology Center and Network, is the implementation arm of the technology mechanism of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. The Climate Technology Center is a unique domain-driven organization that has been created specifically to first simulate technology cooperation and enhance the development of transfer of climate technologies to developing countries. I have prepared a brief presentation with some example of the work that the CTCN have done in the past and how we could expect to increase our impact during the next program of work that will start in January 2023 and end in January 2027 and will officially be launched at COP27. But for the sake of time, the presentation will be posted afterwards after the event. So please, if you have any question, feel free to consult this presentation at the end of the event, and I will try to answer the question without support. The new program of work of the CTCN will facilitate collaboration across a broad range of stakeholders in promoting climate technology development and transfer, as it is part of its 5 main outcomes expected as a result of the implementation of this program. One of the examples of collaboration of stakeholders from different sectors in different countries is the publication of the Africa Innovates magazine that promotes 50 homegrown African innovations tackling climate change. This magazine was prepared in collaboration with UNDP and launched earlier this summer. The new program of work hopes to help the establishment of an enabling environment and pathways for climate technology acceleration, responding to requests from developing countries. Countries receive technical assistance, capacity building, and knowledge sharing support delivered by the CTCN through network partners to identify and to deploy climate technologies. This builds the sustainable endogenous capacities and mobilizes the private sector investment and as well enhanced institutional and legal frameworks to develop, transfer, and deploy climate technologies. The CTCN is promoting several challenges, such as the Youth Climate Innovation Labs, organized by the CTCN in partnership with SAFEM and Sistars and funded by the European Union. Following the successful completion of the labs and academies in Africa, Asia, and LAC, the MENA Youth Labs just took place this past weekend. 12 teams were selected to move on the 8-week academy. The CTCN manages a similar concept for women called Gender Just Climate Solutions. The Gender Just Climate Solution has created a soft network and a platform for prior participants to engage with each other and to exchange regularly. Initiatives like this are very important for continuity to ensure that it's not a one-off capacity building endeavor, but rather that it continues to build skills to keep participants engaged. The new program of work of the CTCN is building on achievement to date and is introducing 2 new enablers. The first one would be National System of Innovation. The second one would be digitalization that shape 5 system transformations. It acknowledges that many essential technologies already exist. The challenge is to get them deployed where they are needed and to build the enabling environment to support technology innovation, adaptation, and scale-up implementation. The past 10 years of technical assistance has reflected how countries are seeking system-wide transformations in areas such as water, energy, food nexus, sustainable mobility, building and infrastructure, energy systems, as well as business and industry. To come back of the National System of Innovation enabler, this is placed within the context of the Article 10 of the Paris Agreement. With a focus on National System of Innovation as an enabler, the CTCN program of work will build on IPCC findings AR6 that support to strengthen technological innovation system and innovation capabilities, including through financial support in developing countries that would enhance engagement and improve international cooperation and innovation. For the Youth Climate Innovation Labs, several projects were selected, including a project in Sub-Saharan Africa that promotes digitalization to drive land restoration efforts. With this new program of work, the CTCN will also focus on digital solutions, which drives resilience in communities and promote low-emission development strategies led. It will explore how digital technologies and circular design can bring significant potential in reductions in the global carbon footprint. In this regard, the CTCN will also focus on promoting access to digital public goods. This includes, for example, freely available and open source or software, data, standards that will enable the design of policies that support climate risk assessment, planning for adaptation and resilience at country level, promotion of low emission pathways, and informing climate investment decisions. This project in Sub-Saharan Africa is a good example of what can be achieved through digitalization. I would like to end this very short presentation or answer with an example that demonstrates as well that the CTCN is involved in renewable energy, and also through the labs, one project was selected as a community-based smart microgrid for Sub-Saharan Africa. We deliver assistance to many countries in a broad range of sectors through unique partnership model that leverage the expertise of our host, UN agency, which is UNEP, along with a global network of over 500 academic, civil society, finance, private sector, research institutions, as well as national designated entities from over 160 countries to provide customized technology solutions. The private sector makes up nearly to 50% of the Climate Technology Center network, most of whom represent small and medium-sized enterprise, where many innovative mitigation and adaptation technology are being developed and adapted. The CTCN serves as a kind of a technology broker, connecting country needs to partners that can provide the technologies, capacity building, knowledge, and finance they seek. Finally, to summarize the objective of the new program of work of the CTCN, the program will need to ensure that first, country can accelerate innovation at different stages of the technology cycle through collaborative approaches. Second, countries have clear pathways and options to enhance technology development and transfer. 3, countries have enhanced enabling environments, including policy and regulatory environments to develop, transfer, and deploy climate technologies. 4, Stakeholders are actively engaged and have strengthened capacity to implement climate action through collaboration. And 5, countries have access to technical assistance and financial support to enhance development and transfer of gender-responsive technologies. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these valuable remarks, Nadej. I think you shared some really interesting insights on the CTCN's past, but also upcoming work. And I think you mentioned some very key points on capacity retention, but also on targeting the right stakeholders and addressing the concrete needs on the ground with the interventions by the CTCN. I think there's always a lot to learn for other bodies under and outside the convention in terms of how the CTCN has been building its experience in that area as well. Thank you very much. Now I would like to turn to Kenneth with my next question. Kenneth, the 2021 report of the UNESCO UNEVOC International Center, it sheds light on the skill gaps for the implementation of NDCs, including with regards to sectoral needs. And I was wondering, reflecting on these findings, what considerations are necessary for governments and/or for educational and training institutions to formulate capacity building solutions that address the existing skill gaps? Are there any examples of how findings from this report have informed policies and actions on the ground?
Yes, thanks, Simone, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone who is participating. I would like to thank the UNFCCC Paris Committee on Capacity Building for inviting us, and thank you for bringing into the discussion the paper that we have developed, which is, of course, one of the resources for this deep dive dialogue. For the context of my input today, I just want to mention that I represent UNESCO UNEVOC, which is UNESCO's specialized agency for Tibet. And we are based here in Bonn, just beside UNFCCC offices. And we work and coordinate with a network of institutions at different UNESCO member states, and these institutions are at the ministries, national bodies involved and responsible for Tibet and skills development, and also universities, research, and training providers. So in this context, Tibet, when I mentioned this in my intervention, as part of lifelong learning, is seen as a critical sector that can be an important enabler to equip learners and communities with tools to be able to adapt and integrate climate responses. So when I say tools, when I mention tools, we are talking about, of course, the knowledge, the skills, the competence, and the attitudes, behavior, and mindsets that we need to be able to achieve a significant reduction in the carbon emissions and accelerate the transition to a green economy. So the qualitative review that you have just mentioned and the analysis that we have done, it was conducted between 2017 and 2018. So the NDCs and the NCs that we have reviewed, including some communication documents, they cover probably about less than 40% of the total submissions at the time. But nevertheless, it was a worthwhile exercise because we could also see already tendencies and trends in the process. So the main purpose of that study was to understand the potential gap at how climate change action plans were being prepared and were being structured, and how the various communication documents are also linking climate response to the needs for skills development or the needs for developing the right skills. And why is it important is first, we think that adopting sustainable economic strategies will certainly impact work, and the changes in the workplace will impact how the workforce will meet the changing skills profile of jobs or be in a position to adopt mitigation and adaptation practices to contribute in the green transition. So it is also important to understand that to understand better the potential impact of graduates or the potential impact in graduates who are trained And if they are not trained, or if they are trained using older technologies or production methods that contribute to carbon emissions, so are not very much resource efficient or climate friendly or climate resilient, then it will be a very difficult job for the education sector to respond and to make sure that they're able to adapt their actions. So second, why it is important for us to understand these connections is that the new demands for people with the right skills also demand transformation in education and training systems. And these transformations, as we know, are dependent on those who are responsible for defining the skills policy agenda that are implemented by education and training systems, or they are also dependent on the educators who will translate the agenda into their classroom activities, pedagogical practices, curricular content, and whatever role they play in delivering education and training. So to the question, what considerations must we focus on? So I think the study has informed us that placing education and skills development policy measures that can serve as enablers for policymakers, educators, and learners who are the future workforce or employers to be able to understand first and act upon the changes in the demands for skills and the changes in the skills profiles of jobs. So in this context, in the green transition, there are jobs that we know are gonna will decline, and there are jobs that will be restructured. The new profiles will be created, and here being able to use data for those actors in the education and training systems, using data and translating them into measures that can help transform their responses and approaches, and building the capacity of education stakeholders to make a good use of these data to inform their priorities and the different approaches would be very critical. So that is one point. And then adapt training to become more flexible and supportive, and make sure that training provisions are adaptive to individual learning needs. So this is again important because we have to take into account that learners are not just learners for a certain chapter of their lives, but throughout life, many of them can be lifelong learners, and the decline of jobs in one sector and the creation of jobs in another sector would allow these learners for greater mobility. And here, for them to be able to seize the opportunities in this mobility, we will need to develop measures that can help them to upskill and to receive reskilling provisions that help them to benefit communities and societies as a whole. So this will help meet the current skills gaps in sectors that are largely affected and help anticipate the potential gaps. So the study has tried to identify where the potential gaps in skills, and you will find it in some of the pages. And there are also some examples there of how different countries have already identified the role of TVET, but also there are gaps in terms of reflecting the key messages of achieving climate ambitions and targets, but without a very clear elaboration on the how. And I think this is one of the big challenges, because setting vision and goals should always have to be accompanied rather by very clear measures and very clear understanding of what skills will be needed, what volume of skills and qualifications would be required in order to meet these demands that we expect to emerge once we set a certain economic agenda or a climate vision. So we need to make sure that we can minimize the shortages and the gaps in having qualified skilled workforce to make sure that the actions become long-term. So in terms of examples how countries are prioritizing, actually, I want to mention here that UNESCO is going to launch a new strategy for TVET. And one of the priorities here is the development of skills for just and sustainable economies and societies. And this in itself will be our tool at UNESCO to mobilize member states to work on their approaches to establish coherence of skill strategies and education and training strategies with the different climate agenda that are available at the national or territorial or local level. And we hope that we would be able to, of course, foster a greater understanding of the climate issues, the urgencies, and the need to accelerate the response. And this study, of course, is helping us communicate that and helping underpin the urgencies and the importance of what we need to do going forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kenneth, for sharing some of the key findings from the 2021 report, but also actually making reference to the upcoming TVET strategy at UNESCO, which will be very interesting to read for sure. So thank you very much for that. With this, I would like to ask my next question to Aline. Aline, as countries utilize economic instruments to cushion the effects of multiple crises we are currently facing, from the COVID-19 crisis to the energy price crisis and the cost of living crisis, what are the main priorities promoted by the trade unions to secure a just transition at the workplace? And what needs to be done to ensure that workers are equipped to contribute and shape the just transition?
Thank you, Simon. And my turn to say good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the participants. Thank you so much for the invitation to contribute to the discussion today of the Durban Forum Deep Dive. Maybe some point of context, because I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with industrial Europe. So I have to explain that we are the mothership of 180 trade union organizations which are active in 38 European countries. And altogether, we represent and defend 7 million workers in the manufacturing, energy, and mining sectors. And as was mentioned already, and as we all know too, is that climate change and the just transition will ultimately take place in our daily life and in our workplaces. So workers are at the forefront of the just transition. And that is the reason why, so you have here all the logos and we have a hashtag, and we also came out with a manifesto on just transition where we sum up all our ideas and priorities. And the priorities we have is, the first one is we want to make sure that we leave no one behind, meaning that we do support all the strategies and targets. Paris Agreement, we have specific EU, European Union targets also for decarbonization. We are all supporting those targets, but we want to make sure that everybody gets on board and no one is left behind. And that is the reason why our priorities is to make sure that a just transition is one that leads to thriving, decarbonized industry. So we want industry to be decarbonized indeed, but we want them to go for growth and development. We don't want to end with dying out industries in Europe. And we want those decarbonized industry to deliver quality jobs and good working conditions, because, of course, we don't want to go for a race to the bottom and to lower wages or working conditions. We want to secure a job-to-job transition. And I think this is one of our top priority. We want to make sure that when we talk about just transition, we're not talking about the job that Kenneth mentioned. Some jobs will be replaced, displaced, changed, transformed, restructured. And what we want to make sure that we avoid is that workers lose their job, go to unemployment, maybe there get some training, and probably would get a job. What we want to make sure is that when we talk about reskilling and upskilling policies, they start now, and they start for workers that are in active in our industries now. So ideally, they don't go via the unemployment step and they go from one job to another. And this is where skilling and reskilling is so important. However, I want to stress that for us, it's just one of the instruments for this just transition. Because the other instrument, and I like very much what Kenneth also stressed out, is that we can think about developing policies. We have some good ideas and good messages, but the question is how to implement on the ground. And here, that is something for us so important. In Europe, we have this tool that we use a lot, and that is social dialogue. So we want to make sure that workers, their trade unions, and actually, broadly speaking, the social partners. So I'm going here also to defend the fact that we have to have employers and employer association on board, because it's actually the employers and the trade unions and the workers that know best the skills needs for the future, that know best how the occupation are already changing and will change in the coming months, actually, because now we are talking about this speed of change. So the skill policy agenda that Kenneth also referred to, that is something that is developed and has to be developed by social dialogue with the involvement of social partners. We have this saying at Industrial Europe that we want to make sure that nothing about us and that is about workers is decided without us. So we have to be on board. We have some recipe for success. And I think also this is one thing that I would like to stress out, that in this European discussion we have, and I'm so sorry that I'm talking about the European framework only, but that could be inspiration also for initiatives. We know the recipe for going through this just transition. And the recipe is, first, you have to start with some strategic thinking. I'm here representing workers in the industry, and it means that we need to discuss and decide what are the industries we want for the future. Some industries nowadays are industries which are solutions to support climate change, and some industries are industry that needs to be restricted because they are too carbon intensive and energy intensive industry. So we have to have this thinking, what are the industry we want for the future, so that we will know what are the skills that we will need for the future. Second point, we need strategic funding. Money is key. Money is key to support the industry, to support the companies, and to support the training effort. The pace and the scale of the change that is already taking place is massive. We're talking about millions of jobs that are going to change or to be useful in supporting the climate transition. The need for training is tremendous, so is the need for funding. The third tool, as I mentioned, social dialogue. And when I say social dialogue, that is trade unions and employer association working together, I mean at all levels. It starts at the level of the company, because again, this is where we will know what are the skills that we need for the future. But then it's social dialogue that has to take place in the regions, in the countries, at European and at global level. So everywhere we have to make sure that we have on board all the social partners. The fourth tool is rights. So that is something that has to be put on the table also. I know this is maybe more difficult in a global context to have that kind of discussion, but for sure, what we want is that we have also a legal framework that is supportive of all the instruments and the how to implement the climate change policy. It means, for instance, rights to support social dialogue. So we have to make sure that we fight for the ILO fundamental workers' rights and human rights. You have to have the rights to have a say at the table in your company, your regions, or your country. And it means also rights to training, because when we are talking about skills development, we tend to forget that this is not a given. Paid educational leave is not something that you will find in every single country. Individual right to training, one that targets also the vulnerable workers, because we have this issue, at least at a European level, that it's always the same people and workers going on training and education, high skilled, male. Here we want to make sure that we also get on board women, precarious workers, workers on temporary working contract, for instance, young workers coming onto the labor market, but also senior workers that must not be left behind. And then, so that's really at the end of the process that you can design skills policy and you have reskilling and upskilling, because it's only when you know what are the skills you need, because you know what industry you need, you know the instrument, you know you have social partners on board that can develop and design skills policy that you can have proper re- and upskilling strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aline, and thank you also for making the connection to Kenneth's earlier remarks as well. And then I think also on the focus on social dialogue. And I also heard in both your presentations really the need to anticipate gaps and skill needs and going to the right places for this. Thank you so much. We are running a bit over time, but it was so interesting. I didn't want to cut any of you short. But that means we have very little time for our second round of questions. I would have one question for each of you. One last question, and before we open the floor for our audience to ask questions to you, could I ask you to be very, very concise, in between 1 and 2 minutes max, with your final responses to these last questions, please. And I would be starting with Nadesh with the second question. And I think, Nadesh, you've already mentioned quite a bit about the upcoming work program and activities planned on digitalization, innovation. If you could share with us maybe some thoughts on how the PCCB or other constituted bodies or bodies under and outside the convention actually could support the work of the CTCN in that area, that would be great.
Obviously, thank you very much, Simone. So I will skip a bit the part where I wanted to explain again that we are collaborating with many international partners, including all the kind of sectors, because I think this has already been mentioned, and I will focus mainly on how we think capacity building, stakeholder engagement could be further improved. During the past program of work and during the future program of work, we believe the collaboration with the different stakeholders, including private sectors, academic institutions, government institutions, NDEs, youth, gender, can be reinforced through the facilitation of information sharing across countries via maybe soft and triangular collaboration. We believe that collaboration and knowledge sharing as central pillars, and that we need to reinforce the capacity of countries to facilitate information sharing, collaboration, networking, which will enable the exchange of best recommended practices, experience, and knowledge on technology development and transfer and on indigenous technologies. This also involves strengthening the capacity of countries and communities to be more resilient and to cope better in terms of skills and the ability to access sustainable finance for scale-up and replicative actions. Maybe another angle where we will try to work better in the future is creating markets through removal and institutional and regulatory barriers. And we would like to facilitate the implementation of mitigation and adaptation actions, including the use of planning tools and processes such as the NDCs, the technology needs assessment, the national adaptation plans, technology roadmaps, development of standards, regulations, enabling policies. We would also like to develop market-based financial mechanisms through the private sector engagement and the aggregation of markets through regional standards using a multi-country approach. With regards to the multi-country approach, we believe that it's a common framework of activity based on a theme or focus area adapted to different national circumstances and can be used across a sub-region, a region, or even a continent. Multi-country projects promote capacity building, analysis, research at regional level that permeate direct support at country level. They also present several efficiency gains, such as lower transactional cost, harmonization of policies and regulations across the region. A case example being the assessment of bioenergy potential across 15 countries that we have done in Africa that has identified market opportunities for the private sector to bypass the exploitation of traditional biomass. There is large potential for harmonization of policies and market consolidation, enhanced stakeholders' engagement, scalable impact, and north-south or south-south and triangular collaboration. The new program of work will build on the approach that has been tested in 4 different themes: minimum energy performance standards for transformers and refrigerators, TNAs, circular economy, and e-mobility. Finally, as a last angle to support better capacity building and stakeholder engagement, there's the engagement with the financial mechanism of the UNFCCC. We believe that further interaction with Adaptation Fund, Green Climate Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility should help the country leverage their activities. I think I can stop here to make it shorter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadej, for these additional thoughts and suggestions, and well received. And I'm sure also much interest for the PCCB to follow up on some of the things you've mentioned here. Next to you, Kenneth, if you could give me a very concise response to an additional follow-up question I have. Basically, I would be very interested in if you could mention a few of the enablers or hindrances for TVET institutions to actively engage in the context of NDCs and efforts for a sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, thanks a lot. So one of the things that we are looking at is to really empower TVET institutions to be able to adopt certain standards and some aspirational frameworks that they could localize, they could use as innovative tools for them to be able to identify, integrate, and implement this new skills agenda and focusing on climate change and green skills. So, for example, we are implementing a project called the Bridging Innovation and Learning for TVET, and this is one of the ways for us to foster peer learning. And this is an opportunity, and it could be an enabler because in the network that we are working with, they are really, I would say, hungry for understanding best practices and solutions that they could take inspiration from. So this is one. In terms of challenges, the study has identified 2 key challenges, and I think this is also these are challenges that could be turned into opportunities if we know how to manage the response. And the first is, of course, the lack of capacity from top to bottom in the decision-making pyramid. And this is very apparent, especially in several TVET systems that we work with. And for this reason, we need to really focus on building capacities around the design and the assessment of skills adaptation projects at the government level, because this is something that would need a push, a boost, and I think it will be very helpful for us in the context also of the post-pandemic recovery. Second is to also help educators in their need to establish linkages and impart climate knowledge in cross-cutting areas in education. So often we find that the lack of the conceptualization, a clear conceptualization of how climate issues impact work, impact lifelong learning agenda. So these are all important to consider. Last but not the least is, of course, we found out that it's a challenge in many countries to promote wider dissemination of climate change adaptation information and to connect education response. So given the right strategy, if we manage to disseminate properly and to engage all stakeholders, I think it will be a very good support for TVET systems and education actors to be able to make these connections. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for these reflections on opportunities and challenges. Aline, my final question to you. From your experience in the European Union, could you provide maybe just a few examples of action and practical solutions for training, retraining, upskilling, and reskilling that have been elaborated by trade unions to support workers, including, importantly, female workers as well?
I will be very short because I will invite everybody interested to visit our website. You go on our Just Transition web pages, and there you will have a map of Europe. And for each country, we collected examples and very concrete examples. That includes, for instance, a manifesto that was signed by the social partners of the energy sector in Italy last year. They called it Labor and Energy for Sustainable Transition Manifesto. They have there a roadmap for transitioning in the energy sector. That includes provisions and ideas and plans for reskilling and upskilling in the Italian energy sector. You will find there also, and that the only second one I will mention, because that's really is a landmark historical agreement that was signed in June in Sweden. At national level, employers and trade unions, they reached out an agreement, and then the government also bolstered it with some new legislation, and that's historical agreement on security, job-to-job transition, to secure that the workforce is supported in the transition to climate neutral society. You have provision on employment protections, and you have a lot of provision on lifelong learning, including very generous financial support for each individual in Sweden that would like to reskill and upskill to get prepared for the new jobs. So all this you will find on our website. And of course, if anyone has any question, I remain available also after the webinar if you want to know more.
Super, thanks very much, Aline. And yeah, I can just echo your invitation then for our participants to visit the Industry All Europe website for concrete examples. And also happy to facilitate any follow-up to you or the other panelists if our participants have any questions that cannot be answered during our Q&A session, which starts now. We are over time, as I mentioned, but I would still very much like to at least have like 3 questions either through the chat or through the floor. I do believe I've already seen one question from a participant, and I will read it out. In the meantime, I encourage other participants to ask their questions either in the chat or to write in the chat that they would like to make an intervention. The question that I already see in the chat is concerning the availability or at least existence of any global study report on impact of climate change adaptation measures to the global or any regional labor markets. This is from Dr. Fuad Umbatov, International GHG Inventory and Mitigation Modeling Expert from Azerbaijan. I would ask any panelists if you would like to respond to that question. Aline? Yes.
Yeah,
please.
yeah. I just tried to raise my virtual hand. I'm not sure we yet have, and again, bear in mind that I have these European lenses, not sure we have very specific study on the impact of adaptation strategy, but we do have studies about, and studies. You could find out, and again, please visit our website, but you could also find a lot of information, because in Europe, what we are trying to do is to set up observatory, which are local regional observatories on the change and the impact and how to process it. So there's a lot of work going on in Europe about what we call just transition pathways for regions and sectors. And they will include, of course, data, because they are evidence-based and also based on the knowledge, as I mentioned, of the social partners, the trade unions, and the employers. So the challenge is you don't have one study that is collecting all the work that is being done in the different sectors and regions for the time being, because it's really targeted to specific sectors' needs and regions' needs.
Thank you very much, Aline, for this answer. Would any of the other panelists would like to add to that, or? No, okay. Then I have a second question in the chat from Carol Simon from the Ministry of Environment of Panama. And she's asking where participants can get access to the tools that were presented so that everyone can review and use them. Maybe I can start responding partly to the question by confirming with all participants that we will include what was presented also in the summary report of this event that will be shared with all participants as soon as it's ready. And then I believe that Aline has mentioned the Industry All Europe website, where a lot of the examples of Industry All's work and the tools can be found. I also know that the CTCN has a knowledge portal, and I'm looking to Nadej there, and UNESCO Univoc, the International Center, probably also has their website. But I definitely would like to give the floor to the panelists to give any additional information on specific tools that you may have shared and are not covered on your websites.
I can also start just by mentioning that, so if you access our UNESCO UNEVOC website, you can find a lot of knowledge resources, including some of the very new studies and discussion papers that we have been developing. We have a project that I have just mentioned earlier that's also constantly develop some helpful tools, practical tools, and even some collection of best practices and innovative practices that are premised on the digitalization and the greening of technical and vocational education and training. And I think there's a lot of knowledge there that you could gain from. So please feel free to have a look at our website, univoc.unesco.org. And in addition, UNESCO has a digital library that you can consult. There's plenty of resources there on education for sustainable development, climate change education. Some of them have also some developed in collaboration with UNFCCC through the Action for Climate Empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. And I see also some links to the websites mentioned already in the chat now for everyone. Just received one question for Aline in the chat. Aline, how do you see NDCs playing a role in countries' industrial transitions / job market transitions? And do you see any strong examples of this work in NDCs? And the question comes from Jamie Binden from the NDC Partnership Support Unit.
Okay, and this is exactly the moment where I have to admit that we don't work in the framework of NDCs. So that's not exactly what we have in mind when we look at the very specific European context. In the European context, all the discussion we have about supporting the workforce in transitioning to decarbonized industry, we think about it in the framework of the policy of the European Union. And what is really important for us nowadays, for instance, is all the national strategies that have started to be developed as a response of the pandemic. So you have national strategy for recovery, and part of those national strategy for recovery, there is a strong recommendation and push that they do include element for reskilling, upskilling the workforce, and supporting workers to get on board. So it's not always directly connected to NDCs as say, but the thing is, in every EU member states nowadays, you have this obligation of developing together, and that's our demand with the social partners, those strategies to support workers to go through the transition in a job-to-job transition way.
Thank you very much, Aline, for your response to this question. Due to our slight delay, we need to move on to the next session. I would very much like to thank the panelists again for joining. And if any of the participants have any burning questions to one of the panelists after the event, you can reach out to the Secretariat, and we are happy to forward your question to our panelists. Thank you very much. And yeah, with this, I would hand over to my colleague Zihan for the next part of the meeting.
Great. Thank you very much, Simone, and to the panel for sharing your insights. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Zihan Shen, and I'm supporting the UNFCCC capacity building team as an intern. And I will now proceed to a very brief digital resource wall segment. To provide some context for this segment, prior to this webinar, the capacity building team has invited a range of stakeholders, including panel speakers, members of the PCCB network, and other relevant actors to submit their resources around this webinar topic today in order to facilitate example sharing, knowledge exchange, and further discussion. The submitted resources have been added to the digital resource wall ahead of today's discussion. And while my colleague shares his screen for the Padlet, which you can now see on your screen, I will also share the Padlet link in the chat for everyone's reference. I will now proceed to also briefly introduce the Padlet board and provide an overview of the thematic focus of the resources. Thus far, as you can see on the Padlet, we have received 16 resources in total, representing a wide range of sectors and countries. Collectively, these resources shed light on the role of capacity building in bolstering capacities for innovation to boost climate-informed and contextually appropriate resources for a sustainable recovery in line with national climate and development priorities, as well as enabling gender-responsive green skill development to support the just transition of the workforce in the implementation of NDCs and sustainable recovery. Due to time constraints, we are not able to accommodate interventions during this segment. However, we invite participants to share any additional resources to this wall, and you can do so via the plus function that you can see to the bottom right of your screen when you click on this link. And at the same time, also to make any comments and add your reactions to the resources available on this digital resource wall, indicating the relevance of these resources to your own work. We would also like to highlight that the Padlet digital resource wall will be available for 2 weeks after today's event for further additions, with a view to publishing a selection of these resources on the capacity building portal. So once again, we apologize that due to time constraints, we're not able to invite interventions during this segment, but we very much look forward to also receiving additional resources on this portal to facilitate an example sharing. So with that, I thank everyone for your engagement, and I actually hand the time back to the event moderator, Simone, and the next panel after this to shed light on some of the on-the-ground examples pertaining to the webinar topic. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Zahan. And yes, I can only echo that we would very much welcome further resources to be added to the Padlet, which will also be reflected through the meeting report and then on the capacity building portal of the UNFCCC. Thanks a lot for this. Our next segment now aims to facilitate a sharing of on-the-ground examples in the context of capacity building for green skills and climate innovation. I would like to introduce our presenters in this segment. Starting with Pemi Gazella from South Africa. Pemi is an astute public servant professional with hands-on experience in international relations negotiations, focusing on multilateral trade and climate change negotiations, community engagement and advocacy. She is currently a director for international climate change in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment in South Africa. She has over 12 years experience in international negotiations with special focus on the multilateral climate change negotiations and a keen interest in understanding environmental management and climate change issues and their impacts on vulnerable groups, including women and youth in particular. In the UNFCCC negotiations, her focus is on gender and climate change, capacity building, and action for climate empowerment, where she is the focal point for South Africa. Welcome very much to this webinar. Pemi, it's great to have you here. Next, please allow me to introduce Eddie.
Thank you very much, Simone.
Welcome, Pemi. Allow me to introduce Eddie Thimbatya. Eddie is the CEO of Finding XY, an innovation center that supports micro, small, and medium enterprises and ecosystem builders by providing investment and business development support to entrepreneurs in Africa. Eddie has over 15 years of professional experience in the field of impact investment, economic development, and business development working with social and climate smart MSMEs, investors, and development agencies. He currently manages facilities promoting green finance, gender lens impact investment in agriculture, and promotion of climate smart technologies in East Africa. He is an Oxford University alumni and a member of the Private Financing Advisory Network, and he also serves as a board member of the Uganda Solar Energy Association. Welcome, Eddie. We are happy to have you at the event.
Thank you.
Last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce Sergio Lamotta. Sergio is a member of the Technology Executive Committee, TEC, under the UNFCCC. He has previously also served as a member of the advisory board of the CTCN. He currently also serves as the Italian representative in the steering committee of the Low Carbon Societies Research Network and as a member of the Italian National Competent Authority for the implementation of the emission trading system in Italy. Sergio received a degree in physics at the University of Pisa and started his career in the photovoltaic laboratory at ENEA. Since 1997, he has been a member of the Italian negotiation team for climate issues. Welcome, Sergio, and it's great to have you here as well. Now, we will first hear brief presentations from Pemi and Eddie, And then Sergio will provide his reflections and takeaways from this segment. Due to our time constraints, and as we would absolutely want to ensure time for a Q&A after the presentations, I would kindly ask every speaker to stay within the allotted time frame of 3 to 5 minutes for each intervention. And I will be keeping the time and would politely remind you during your remarks if needed. And with this, Pemi, I would like to give the floor to you to start.
Thank you very much, Simone, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I think I'll just quickly go through, because a lot has already been said. Now, for us, tackling climate change, Simone, will require a significant, unprecedented changes across all sectors of the economy, innovation in the energy system, including a massive shift to low carbon energy sources, as well as changes to the way land is used and how we grow our food. Making these changes will not be easy, however, and this is why in South Africa we talk about the change that is done in a just manner, leaving no one behind. And capacity building for skills development to support climate innovation and just transition of the workforce is an important enabler in climate action. In the implementation of nationally determined contribution and sustainable recovery. Just transition for us is about seizing opportunities and managing risk towards a climate resilient and low economy while improving the lives and livelihood of all South Africans, in particular the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. I'm on the next slide. A successful transition to a low carbon economy will only be possible by ensuring that workers are able to adapt and transfer from areas of decreasing employment to other industries, and that human capital is maximized to develop new industries. Hence, with the importance of green skills, these skills are needed to adapt product, services, and processes to climate change and the related environmental requirements and regulations. Skills that will be needed by all sectors and all levels in the workforce. Skills that are crucial for making transition from energy and emission-intensive economy to a cleaner and greener production and service pattern. In order for a successful transition, there is a need for a greater integration of climate and energy policies with measures to support employment and innovation and responsive vocational education and training policies that encourage the development of skills needed by low economy. The just transition has the potential to create more jobs that are equitable and inclusive. And this is why our just transition stems from the following. How do we empower people and communities in a transition to a low emission economy? How do we ensure that the most impacted don't get left behind? And how do we support the goals of social inclusion and decent work for all? How do we continue to solve South Africa's triple challenges? Which is inequality, poverty, and unemployment based on the roadmap laid on our National Development Plan. Now, in terms of skills and development and education, it is important that we develop new skills for those impacted, the poor and the youth, women, communities, and job seekers, empowering them to seize the opportunities offered by new industries. And this would require reskilling the workers whose job may be lost because of the transition with a focus of creating decent work and preserving job location. Expanding access to skills, including with certification, providing reliable and affordable internet access in affected areas for online learning and job searching, investing in basic education system, helping younger learners understand the impacts of climate change and preparing them the shift that lies ahead. Investing in higher education system, providing school leavers and graduates with competencies that are needed in the green industries. Maximizing decent work and labor-intensive industries in low-carbon economies, such as renewable energy and battery manufacturing production of electric vehicle and green hydro systems. And then in terms of innovation, it is important that we develop competitive industries to produce inputs and supportive services. We establish regulatory frameworks that promote new technologies, including by changing regulation that restrict them unnecessary, setting technical standards that enable and encourage new technologies, ensuring that South African National System of Innovation is climate aware and fosters innovation with support of low carbon and climate resilient activities, disseminating information about new technologies, managing and lobbying from established producers that aim to protect older and competitive production side, focusing on technology advances that create and generate employment and broaden ownership. And all this, Simone, I must just underscore that all this requires support and resource intervention to implement them. I thank you. And this is what we currently are doing in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pemi, for this interesting experience from South Africa. And also thank you very much for staying just within your 5 minutes. Excellent, thank you. Yes, next I have Eddie on my list of speakers, and I would like to give you the floor, Eddie, to share your experiences.
Thank you so much, Simone. I'll just go ahead and share my screen. I hope you can see my screen.
I will let you know. Yeah, we see it. If you can turn to full view if possible, but we see it also large enough, I think.
Is that good? Is that good enough?
This looks good, yes.
Okay, all right. So this is a case study with finding XY and what we are doing in the region on issues to do with climate change, and looking more at innovative financing. The Africa Green Technologies Facility is a framing of a program that we came up with following market studies with UNOPS, where we looked at challenges to raising capital for locally founded solar companies, as well as looking at the adoption of captive solar in the country. So one of the things we quickly realized that most of these enterprises had challenges to accessing finance because of weaker cash flows, and most of the industries and factories that wanted to use greener technologies also faced challenges because they had to pay for these facilities upfront. So the Africa Green Technologies Facility is a unique program to strengthen domestic markets for green technologies. So rather than being a VC fund, we use a matchmaking approach. We define feasible projects that are needing investments, match these projects to funders and investors, provide the technical support in profiling these projects in terms of sizes, and bringing on board service providers for the delivery of these technologies so that the impact or the transition, the green energy transition, can be realized. So the goal is to enable implementation of green technology projects, giving opportunities to local climate smart enterprises to grow and to provide green energy and better climate adaptation solutions in local communities. The key objectives here, we're looking at the bankability of green enterprises. Here you have so many enterprises that are unable to raise commercial finance from, for example, banks. So looking at that, and the accountability and risk management for funders. Most investors do indicate that, especially the green energy businesses, have weaker cash flows, usually coming down to their models like use of pay-go. So you find that the cash flows are weak. So addressing that risk factor for funders, and also underwriting the weaker cash flows of also these enterprises. So the key facility interventions are aggregating investment pipeline of large customers with feasible green technology project needs, profiling of interested funders for initial investment and future funders, designing and creation of investment portfolio bundles to match the right investment portfolio with appropriate funders. This matching can be done at a different criteria depending on the cash flow timings, repayment schedules, and non-financial expected returns, providing hands-on technical assistance and business advisory for local projects to improve the opportunities to unlock current and future investments, and then use of technology that is and blended finance and alternative structures to improve bankability of local enterprises, providing one-on-one debt investment or seeking benefits through aggregation and consolidation. This is just a framing of the whole business model of the AGTF. So right here you have the facility that is convening what we call C2 investors and C1 investors. Our C1 investors are the impact first investors, and the C2 investors are profit first investors. And then we have larger customers. So these are industries. Can be government or any other multinational or locally large entity that has a larger value chain that is in need of green technologies. And then you have the green tech providers. These are suppliers or distributors of green technologies, and the manufacturers, and then the end users of these technologies. So these are some of the facility factors I've just gone through that this facility brings together to make sure that we have a good project that is investment ready for our investors. And then there are additionalities to this project where we look at creating a database that is going to promote investments in some of these companies, putting together a data room, for example, of what information investors may need in order to proceed with investments in some of these companies. And then we facilitate business support for the enterprises to enable them to be investment ready, including pitch training, business plan preparation, and financial planning, and also provide direct support to industries and factories, manufacturers, governments, and other entities that are seeking to invest or employ green technologies. And if a funder would like to exit, the facility can assist in searching for a potential buyer for an existing loan. And this is just briefly about finding XY, where we actually design such market interventions, mainly looking at capacity building and access to low-risk capital to enable this transition to green energy and technologies. So thank you so much, Simone, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Eddie, and thanks for sharing this interesting example of the facility that you're working on. Now I would like to hand over the floor to Sergio to provide his reflections and takeaways on this segment. Thank you, Sergio.
Thank you, Simone. First of all, good day, everyone. I'm going to share also my presentation. And so, first of all, thanks a lot. Many thanks to the PCCB for inviting the Technology Executive Committee, which is part of the technology mechanism, together with our twin institution, which is the CTCN. So tech is mainly devoted to so to say, the policy branch of the technology mechanism. And so we are more devoted in the building of a report that can, so to say, give the direction to be taken the most efficient way to cope with innovation, to cope with financial issues, etc. While the CTCN is more the implementing branch, and so is more on ground, so to say. So my duty here is to give my reflection to the example provided during the last two presentations, the one taken by Eddie and by Penny, and also sharing the findings from one of our last report. I mean, a report from the tech on the national system for innovation. Of course, innovation is one of the main issues that tech is facing. Is one of the five areas on which we have to elaborate, following, of course, the COP mandate. So during time constraints, I have no time, of course, to, so to say, to dive deep on the two previous presentations. So apologies to Eddie and to Pemi. the things that I want just to pick up from these two presentations, which are, so to say, the thing that they have in common is the issue of the risk management. Of course, the point of view of EDI, which represents the private sector, is of course very different from the point of view of PEMI, who represents a governmental institution, so a ministry. From the point of view of EDI, the risk management is mainly devoted to minimize the risk for the founder. So it is, I would say, more focused on the avoiding risk for a very specific project, the project that should be financed. While the point of view of PEMI is to avoid that a large share of the population are, so to say, left behind, especially the most vulnerable share of the population, and also, of course, the workers that should be able to adapt and transfer from areas of decreasing employment to other industries. One element of the PEMI presentation that I want to pick up is also the reference that PEMI has given to the South African National System for Innovation. In the PEMI presentation, she says that we have to ensure that this National System for Innovation is climate aware or is focused on the climate issues. This is important for me to highlight, as it gives me the occasion to start the second part of my speech, which is this report. It is the setup and implementation of National System of Innovation, which is a tech report issued during the last meeting with Tech 25. The objective of this presentation is to give the stakeholders a set of recommendations if they want to set up and implement a national system for innovation. So it is important, first of all, to have a sort of approach of a technological, methodological frame in order to see the case studies through some lens that can help us in assessing assessing the good and the bad of what we are studying. So the kind of methodologies we have chosen is this function versus resources allocated. So the function are the 7 functions that you can see in the left bottom part of this slide, and these are the kind of functions that you would expect as an outcome of the activities done by a national system for innovation. So it stands from the knowledge development and infusions towards a situation in which we have to bring these technologies into the market. The kind of case studies that have been selected respect the idea of an equilibrium of representing the regions in the world, and also the equilibrium of mitigation versus adaptation. So the case studies analysis has in fact assessed what are the kind of activities that are, so to say, can be categorized in the 7 function, and try to select the win and lose situation. These are the 3 case studies that have been picked or studied. The 4th will be also in the 2nd version, which has been already decided at the previous tech meeting. But the 3 that you will find in this document, and I invite you to read it. I shared it in the shared document. that Izan, as Zihan has already told us. So the first is the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. So of course the sector is energy efficiency in the mitigation area. It is a top-down initiative in the sense that it is an initiative from the government. So in fact, this institution is considered in a law, in a country law, so it is a top-down initiative. And the kind of functions that this Bureau of Energy Efficiency is facing are the knowledge development and diffusion, the entrepreneurial experimentation, and the market formation. The second is the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, which tackles with mitigation and adaptation. In the area of mitigation, we have energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency, agriculture, water, waste and forestry. Is a top-down. This Kenyan Climate Innovation Center has been instituted by an international initiative from the World Bank, and it copes, in addition to the three kind of functions we have seen in the previous examples, also in the resource mobilization. The third is the disaster risk reduction in Haiti. It tackles the adaptation and all sectors of adaptation. Is a mix of top-down and bottom-up initiative in the sense that is an initiative from the country, but also is a bottom-up in the sense that also some privates, some NGOs come and have given their contribution in the building of this initiative. This is coping with the knowledge, guidance, research, resource mobilization, and legitimation. The fourth, in the last line, if we will have an update of this report, we will go with the Brazil bioethanol program. This is my last slide, and in fact, it is perhaps the most important to analyze, which in fact highlights the success factors. So first, it is important for a successful national system of innovation to have a systemic perspective, and also it should be integrated with host country development objectives. So we have to build something that is in, so to say, in the objective of the host country. Otherwise, you have the risk to build a cathedral in the desert, but you want to build something that is really in the very city center of this country. The second is to have a tailored approach to bridging sector innovation phase specific gaps. The third, very important, is participation of local actors and inclusion of local knowledge and coordination among actors. The fourth is the engagement with international institutions and collaboration to help build local institutions, network, of course, capacity building of the researchers, for example. The fifth is to ensure that innovation and organization are evolutionary in time and able to adapt to new circumstances. This is very important, otherwise we underestimate to have something which has no dynamic. Innovation is looking at the future, so you have to be very dynamic in the sense. And the sixth is to pay attention to long-term planning. We are looking at something which is not short-term. So we are looking, so to say, at the goals of 2050. But this is the idea. But medium, I would say, medium long-term. And also, it is very important to have a continuous monitoring and review to ensure that efficiency is taken over time. So this is my last slide, because this one is just the concrete recommendation, but are, so to say, logical consequences of the lesson learned. And these are simply adjusted, categorized in if you have the preparatory phase of the initial system, you have very early stage, embryonal phase of the initial system of innovation, or you are in the implementation phase, or you are in the evaluation and realignment practices. So this is my presentation, and thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for this really, really interesting presentation, for your reflections on the previous, I think you're still sharing your screen. Yes, perfect. And your reflections on the previous presentations and then also the insights on the text work. I realize I'm a very bad timekeeper, but I found it too interesting to cut you all short. So I hope our participants also really enjoyed this segment as much as I did. Now we have run over time, and the new goal is to close this event at 1:45, which would mean, like, if participants, I would still like to give the opportunity for maybe 1 or 2 questions in the chat. If anyone would like to raise a question through the chat, please do so now. And then we move on to the closing segment. I don't see any questions coming in. So then I would say the same, what I mentioned after the panel discussion, of course, also goes for here. If you have any burning questions to our speakers of this segment, please do reach out to us at the UNFCCC Secretariat afterwards, and we are happy to facilitate a connection with our speakers. With this then, I would like to thank Pemi, Eddie, and Sergio, and would hand over to Marcena for the closing segment.
Thank you very much, Simone. On behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank you all for being present, and our special thanks go to panelists and presenters who provided great inputs to this event. The PCCB will share a summary report of today's event with all participants, and we will also post a link to the recording of today's event on the event website. Finally, for the next 2 weeks, the Padlet for resources will remain accessible and open for everyone to share additional materials. Moving forward, building on the close relations with the theme of this Durban Forum Deep Dive seminar, we invite you to join the 4th Capacity Building Hub at COP27, and specifically to join the Just Transition and Sustainable Economies Day and PCCB Focus Area Day. The findings of this webinar will also be shared subsequently with a view towards having a deeper dive into this discussion during the Capacity Building Hub at COP27. The only thing left for me is to kindly ask you to complete our anonymous post-event survey. It will only take you just a few minutes, and your feedback on how you like today's event and your suggestions for our future webinars will be very important in guiding our work. Please click on the link that is posted in the chat to access the short survey, and we hope to see many of you at our upcoming events. So thank you very much, and goodbye, and until the next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.